Welcome to another episode of Safari and Serial Killers. In this episode, I will be talking about Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer. So the first question you might have is, what was his childhood and family like? Gary Ridgway was born on February 18th in Salt Lake City, Utah. Gary Ridgway grew up in Seattle, and his father worked as a bus driver while his mother worked as a sales clerk. He later claimed that during his childhood and early teens, his mother would perform inappropriate acts upon him, and he would often fantasize about killing her. When Ridgway was a teenager, he found a kindergartner playing in the neighborhood and proceeded to stab him in the liver. He always wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone, apparently, and walked away from the child while laughing. Gary admitted to feeling sexual attraction to his mother, which also contributed to his hatred toward her. His mother and father would fight constantly, which caused him to act out rationally. Ridgway was also not the favorite child in the family, which caused self-doubt, insecurity, and anger to arise. His older brother, Gregory, was a lot smarter than Greg, and this is a factor that may have caused his killing spree. Something else you might wonder is if his childhood behavior indicated a problem. Ridgway was always getting in trouble as a kid, either at school or at home, and this was one of the many problems he has as a child. His behavior as a child certainly indicated that there was a bigger problem on the rise. There were signs of sociopathy in his early childhood. Examples include torturing and killing animals, wetting the bed until age 13, and committing minor arson. What was his adult life like? After graduating from high school in 1969, at age 20, he served in the U.S. Navy for 2 years. After that, he settled down in the Seattle area and became a truck painter. He was married 3 different times and had 1 son. His only education was a high school diploma. Was he ever diagnosed with a mental disorder, or did he receive treatment? Although no official diagnosis was given, Ridgway is believed to have antisocial personality disorder. What was the MO? The nature of the crime stayed fairly similar. All of his victims were women, and many of them were either sex workers or runaways. All of the bodies of his victims were either found in the Green River near Seattle, or remote wooded areas near the river. His early victims were all found in the river, but he later started burying them deeper in the woods so their bodies wouldn't be found. He later confessed to killing sex workers because he hated all of them, and he also confessed to hating most women in general. He would also rape them and perform necrophilia. He would strangle most of them to death. When the police had no other leads, they gave Ted Bundy a visit while he was on death row in Florida. He speculated that this killer was revisiting the dump sites of his victims to perform sexual acts on them. This later ended up being correct. What was the time span for the crimes? Most of his murders occurred between 1982 and 1998. During this 20-year period, he stayed married to his 3rd wife and kept a steady job. The first body was found on July 15, 1982. After this date, more and more bodies were found in and around the Green River. On August 16, 1982, a police task force was set up to find the person responsible. At this point, they had already assumed this was a work of a serial killer. Gary Ridgway first became a suspect in 1983 when he was believed to be seen with one of the victims, 18-year-old Mary Malvar. In 1984, Ridgway passed a polygraph test, which are now known for being inaccurate. How many victims? What evidence was found? Ridgway confessed to killing 48 women in court in 2003. He stated that he killed so many women that he had a hard time keeping them straight. Although he only claimed to have killed 48 women, it is now known that the number is much higher, somewhere around 80 women. DNA was found on the bodies that was eventually linked to Ridgway after more advanced technology came out. A recently unsealed court filing says metal fragments containing aluminum were recovered from 5 dump site locations. The aluminum is commonly used at Kenworth Truck, which is where Ridgway worked. Ridgway also matched the semen left at the crime scene. In 1983, he even reached out to assist the police investigation, which was suspicious. Because Ridgway was the last person allegedly seen with 2 of the victims, police eventually searched his home and vehicles in 1987 in connection with the murders. What evidence was used at the trial? In 1987, Ridgway finally gave the police a saliva sample, which later matched the DNA at the crime scenes. There was not sufficient DNA testing at the time, however, so Ridgway remained a free man for more than a decade. This evidence was used at the trial in 2003. An added forensics link to Ridgway was made by the location of small amounts of spray paint on the clothing of 6 victims that compared to paints collected from Ridgway's workplace. Ridgway ultimately avoided the death penalty by confessing to the murders of 48 women. What was he charged to? When it came time for Gary Ridgway to go to court, the names of all 48 victims of the Green River Killer were read aloud, a process that took almost 10 minutes. CBS reports there was a pause after each name, long enough for Ridgway to enter his guilty plea. Admitting to his guilt kept him off death row, but there was more to it. Ridgway promised to bring closer to dozens of other unsolved murder cases, including an original 7 more that the law enforcement said they had evidence that he was involved with. Gary Ridgway was able to stay off death row since he confessed guilty to all of the murders. He was charged with a life sentence without parole, and he spends 23 hours of each day in solitary confinement. Is he still alive today? Yes, he is still alive and is now 71 years old. He will spend the rest of his life in the Washington State Penitentiary. I have a picture of him. This is what he looks like. He was caught at age 52. This is him in his 2003 court.